In this lecture, we'll talk about how to provide text output in our Unity games. And this is really useful if we want to share some textual information, like a score, with the player. Let's go take a look. We're starting with our fish shooter game that we developed previously, and I'm going to add a text display of the score to this game. There's a big idea associated with adding user interface or UI elements to our game. And the big idea is that those elements go onto something called a canvas. At least in our 2D games, you can actually add user interface elements in a 3D world if you wanted to do so. But in our 2D games, we'll put our UI elements onto a canvas. So I'm going to right click here in the scene view and I'm going to add a UI canvas down at the bottom. As you can see, when I added the canvas, I also got an event system, and we'll need that when the player is interacting with menu buttons or if they were providing text input as part of the game and so on. We won't actually use the event system in this game, but it comes automatically with our canvas and we'll just leave it alone. I'm going to rename my canvas to be HUD because this really is the HUD. And now I'm going to add a text element to our HUD. And I'll right click. And down in UI, I will pick Text Mesh Pro. And I'm going to just change the name of this right now to Score Text. And as you can see, we have text added to our screen. I'm going to do a number of things with this text. First, I'm going to anchor it to a particular location. And anchoring our elements to a particular location makes it so that they stay in that location even in the face of resolution changes, which is important to us. So I'm going to anchor this to the top middle, and then I'm going to move it up to be closer to the top. And I'm going to come down here to alignment, and I'm going to center my text. And at this point, I don't actually care what the text says because I'm going to handle changing the text in my HUD script, but I'll change it here to say score 0. It's also important, since I talked about resolution changes, that we come back to our canvas and look at the canvas scaler here in the inspector. And the default for our canvas scaler is that it's a constant pixel size. And that's a really bad idea if we're going to have different resolutions. So I'm going to change this to scale with screen size. And when I do, I need to provide a reference resolution. And I'll just say 1920 by 1080 is my reference resolution. Now that I've done that, you can see that my text is a little too close to the top and not quite big enough. So I'll come back to my text and I'll move it to be -100 instead. And I'll change the font size to be something bigger than 36, 48 for example. And I can change lots of characteristics of this text. I can make it bold, and you'll notice that it wrapped there. And I can avoid that wrapping by coming up here to the width of my text, and I can make it wider, and then I don't get that wrapping. So we can modify the width and height of our text component to make sure the text displays the way we want it to. And we can change the color, and we can change alignment as you've already seen me do. There's lots of stuff that we can do to change our text. But I like this the way it is for now, so we'll keep moving on. I do know that I'm going to need my HUD to be tagged. So I'm going to tag that now. It's obviously not one of the default tags, nor one of the custom tags that I already added to this game. So I'll add one more tag, and I'll call it HUD, and I'll save. And as you know, that doesn't tag it. I still need to come back and tag it with HUD. The other thing I need to do is take my HUD script and attach it to my HUD canvas. Let's go take a look at that HUD script now. Then we'll populate the serialized field that you can see in the inspector, and then we'll look at the rest of the code that actually uses the HUD script. So here in my HUD script, this is the serialized field that we're going to populate. And I've called the field score text, and here's the data type for the score text. It's TextMesh Pro UGUI. So TextMesh Pro Unity Graphical User Interface. I will say in the legacy text system, text used to be called text, but using TextMesh Pro, we have this other data type that we use for the text that we're going to display on a canvas. This class is found in the TM Pro or TextMesh Pro namespace, so we need to include a using directive for TextMesh Pro. I should have pointed out earlier, but I forgot because I already have TextMesh Pro installed in this project. TextMesh Pro comes in a separate package. So if you try to add a TextMesh Pro user interface element to your game and you don't have that package installed yet, you'll get a pop-up that looks like this pop-up right here, and you should just say that you want to import the TMP Essentials, and that will install the package for you so you can actually use the TextMesh Pro user interface element. Okay, back to the code. So we have our text element here, and we've added the using directive we need to include that TextMesh Pro data type in our code. I also have an integer for the score, and I want an integer for the score so that we can do math. We can add to the score when we should. I also have a constant. That's a string. That's my score prefix. So when I display the score, I will display score colon space, and then I'll display the score. So let's see how we do that. Here in the start method, here's my reference to my TextMesh Pro UGUI object, and I can access the text property of that object. And if I access the set accessor for that property, then I can pass in a string. So I can pass in my score prefix, and then I can concatenate with score. But to make it concatenate with an integer, I need to call the toString method on that integer variable. And that makes this a string, so I can use plus to concatenate those two strings together and set the text property to that string. I will say that the TextMesh Pro documentation is not integrated with the Unity scripting reference. So if you want to find out about the TextMesh Pro classes, you should Google Unity TextMesh Pro documentation and follow the most promising hit, which will bring you to the TextMesh Pro documentation. Or you can just do something like this and scroll through all the possibilities looking for something that might work for you. That's probably worse than actually reading the documentation because we've learned how important reading documentation is, but this is another option for you. Speaking of other options, there is a setText method right here that also lets us set the text, and we can do some more complicated setting of the text by calling this method, but we're just going to access the property as you saw above. The only other thing we have in our HUD script is we have a public method that doesn't return anything. The method name is addPoints, and whoever's calling this method passes in the number of points to add to the score, and we do two things here. We add those points to the score, the integer field that we have in this script, and we set the text so that it includes the new score. So this updates the text display to display the new score. So who will actually call this addPoints method? The most reasonable object to call this method is the teddy bear, because the teddy bear will call that method when it gets destroyed so that we can add points to the game. I'm going to add a field to the teddy bear class. And all we really need as a field is a constant that says, how much is a bear worth? And we'll make bears worth 10. When a teddy bear collides with a fish, as you know, we take damage. And here's where we should update the score in the HUD if in fact the teddy bear just died. The first thing we need is to get access to the HUD script so we can call the add points method. And this is why I added a tag to the HUD. So I want a reference to the HUD. And the way we'll get that reference is we'll call game object find game object with tag. And the tag we want to provide is HUD, because that's how I tagged the HUD. And then I need to get the script component, the HUD script component that's actually attached to the HUD. So there's a lot going on here. We find the HUD game object, which is that canvas, which is a game object, and then we get the HUD script that's attached to that HUD canvas, and we put it into this variable. Now we can call the HUD add points method not with health but with bear points. And since I now have 2 blocks of code here in this if statement, I'll say destroy teddy bear here as a comment. Okay, this builds just fine. So we'll come back to our game and run it. And immediately fail because we have this null reference exception. And if I double click it, we see that that's happening right here. And it's happening right here on this score text object because even though I claimed that I would populate this field when we came back, I lied about that. So let's actually populate the field like so, and we'll try running our game again. And this time we don't crash, and now I can shoot a teddy bear, and as you can see, my score went up. And that's how we can add text output to our Unity games. To recap, in this lecture we learned that we need to use a canvas to add our UI or user interface components to our 2D Unity game. And we also learned how to add and use a TextMesh Pro text component to convey information to the player.